Hey everyone, welcome back to another Kitecast episode. We have a real treat today. Billy Spears is joining us. We're going to cover a number of different topics with him, and he has 20 plus years in cybersecurity. Billy, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Patrick. Tim,
Tim, always great to hear you. You have your background back. That's good to see. His background was gone.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, sorry. Thought you were talking to. No, I've got it back. Yes.
Well, Tim, Billy is an award-winning technology executive, author, speaker, podcast host, you name it. He currently is the CISO over at Teradata, where he leads all efforts related to cybersecurity. Previously, he served as the CISO or held senior leadership positions at places like Alteryx, Loan Depot, GE Aviation, Dell, Hyundai Capital America, among other places. Before his foray into the private sector, Billy served as the Director of Privacy and Information Security in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Was one of the first folks over there, I think, in that role. And before that, he was a staff sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps. I don't know what it is about Marines, Tim. We've been interviewing a lot of them.
Yeah, a lot. So a lot of armed forces professionals.
They're keeping us on the straight and narrow, I think. Billy's, as I noted, has received a lot of awards in the leadership positions he's held in cybersecurity, data privacy. He's an active leader in addition to his full-time job in the technology sector ecosystem, serving as a Gartner peer community ambassador, advisor for ASIN's customer advisory board, and he's also an advisor for Cyvatar. Billy, I don't know, you're busy. Every time Tim and I interview folks for a Kitecast episode, it seems like we just aren't busy enough because everyone we interview, like yourself, man, you guys are involved in a lot of different things.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. The community it's important to me. I think giving back is equally as important as what you consume from it. The many years ago, as a lot of folks that have been in this business a long time, when we came up, there weren't a lot of places to go. Now I think there's ample opportunity of technical learning, on the job sort of learning, but also learning from your peers, which I find really, really useful.
I mean, there's tons of things to do out there as a CISO. How do you weigh and evaluate them and decide, this is worth my time, this isn't, this is something where I can contribute. I may not be able to make that big of an impact here. I'm going to punt. How do you make those decisions and where do you find the right opportunities?
I think it's a combination of how much your personal time spent in the area, but also the benefits back. I tend to volunteer my time where there's an actual human receiving the information on the other side, but inversely. So I'm willing to share my information if the other person across the table is willing to share theirs, because in every conversation, feedback is such a privilege. And I always find something that I can learn, do better, more efficient, some new technology, some combination of things. Some different approach to solving the age-old data protection sort of regimen. I find it a lot of fun. So that's where it is. When you get to talk to people, I'm more connected. Less people, I'm probably less involved.
The Gartner thing that I think it was relatively recent that you became an ambassador over there in the Peer Insights program. How often do you, as a technologist, I don't think this is something we've covered in a previous podcast. This is interesting to me. But how often do you turn to those reports to see what vendors are ranking in a particular space? When you're doing a bake-off, you take those into consideration. How do you use those reports from Gartner and Forrester and others in the marketplace?
I think they're really helpful. Those are point-in-time reports, so they're typically in the past. There's just all the research that goes into them. But I find them useful because it's sort of like an impartial set of footprints or details that you can draw some conclusion from based on experiences, other people's interactions, etc. But I try to look at them all the time. So some of them change annually, some of them change every 6 months. But at the pace and the flow of your business, I use them as a strategic sort of marker or barometer when making the next big decision.
And most of the ones in those reports are established vendors, and I'll let Tim jump in and ask a few questions here. How do the ones that are up and start, bleeding edge, brand new to the market, startups and so forth, they may not be ranking as high. How do you find those type of technology providers in the cybersecurity space?
Yeah, I think a couple good places to start. There's a lot of VCs that will invite you to start. Here's their portfolio of companies. And then there's a few industry partners that'll invite you out to some of the geographical spaces that'll have, small niche companies. But also you have, the big conferences. I don't think this is too niche in this talk, but you have your RSA and your Black Hat, whatnot, conference. And I think there's a lot of value. It's not just the networking of your partners, but spend time, go through all the vendors and figure out what works, what's new, what hasn't been done, or maybe what's a specialty that you're missing inside of the platform that that you're using, or maybe many platforms in some cases.
So your role is as CISO at Teradata. Teradata's technology vendor. How much of your role is evangelism versus internal cybersecurity, or is there no event? Can you tell us a little bit about how the dynamics change of a CISO based on where you are, and maybe you can use a couple of different life experiences where that CISO role has changed?
Yeah, sure. My role here at Teradata, first, I'm so grateful. Teradata is such a strong company, right? And I'll probably drop some more Teradata things along this conversation for everyone. But the idea of the role here is, I think it's an equal parts of evangelism and practical development. And what I mean by that is Teradata structure. You have the company itself, you have the product we sell, and then there's the equal parts of getting people comfortable with either who we are or what they're purchasing. And sometimes, we have amazingly technical representatives and other people to assist, but sometimes they just want to hear it from the head of security or our CIO or other folks in the back end that sort of are keeping the factory moving from the security standpoint. So my role is definitely a balance, and I get to come on shows like yours and kind of tell about what we're doing and talk about some of the things that I'm seeing as a security leader.
Good. And as you kind of craft what you see and as you network with CISOs, one question I try to ask when I remember is, other than Gartner, and maybe if you rank it in the top 3 or 4, how were CISOs finding, evaluating and making a decision? What are those sources that they're coming together or bringing together to help make the decisions? Let's assume Gartner's in one of the 3 or 4.
Well, I think it goes back to your evangelist question, right? So how does the role, where was it to where it is, and sort of what are we doing to think about the current sort of challenges, plus strategize towards the future. Traditionally CISOs were primarily focused on just the technical aspects of information security, which I think is rewarding. But in today's complex and maybe the rapidly evolving landscape, CISOs are increasingly taking on more of a role as the evangelist inside the company, which I talked about a little bit in the last question, but also externally, because when you're thinking about making decisions, you have to first have business alignment. So we talk about this a lot in the landscape of saying, hey, cybersecurity is just a technical issue. I disagree. I think it's a full-fledged business issue. It has its own risk sort of vectors and tolerances. And a CISO has to be a stable communicator so that, when you speak, you just don't champion fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but you're championing the importance of what you're seeing around security to other executives and board members, helping them understand how to tie security into the business objectives of risk management. You have to think about the culture itself. And this goes into decision making too, and then I'll get into more how we evaluate specifically. But you have to think about the culture. Do you have a cyber aware culture, or do they just know what they're reading, so they're making their own choices? I've talked about this in the past a lot. It'd be interesting if when we're back in the office full time, if you could just see people stealing the chairs in the elevator with the chairs above their head and they're leaving. Consider that data or something. Wouldn't that be cool? It'd be easy to spot them out. But really, people don't go to work to do bad things. People go to work to get their job done. When there's impediments in the way, stopping them from getting their job done, more commonly than not, they're just reacting and creating a process. So they're using innovation for their best judgment. So if you don't have this cyber aware or security aware culture, sometimes that innovation creates other risks. So it's really important to evangelize there. You have to consider things like regulatory compliance, changes all over the world. I wish there was a one size fits all. I'm probably not in the boat alone there. But the reality is it isn't a one size fits all. There's uber regulations like GDPR or CCPA or others that you have to take into account. And then you have frameworks and you have customer requirements, and people are always trying to get hardened security postures. So when you're a company like Teradata, it's important that you take the highest common denominator and put that into the product, or internalize those practices so people can really have that faith in you that you can deliver what you say. We have to consider vendor and partner relationships, public relations, and then also recruitment and retention. I always tell my team, the longer we stay together, the better we're going to get. And with the global shortage of cybersecurity professionals, CISOs constantly find their draw towards evangelization inside the field of security, and sometimes just to attract and retain talent. Now, if you take all of that stuff and bundle it to what I'm saying is, how do you evaluate what's happening? You have to start with the company's reputation. That's true, because what happens is you can have a startup with the best intent, and they'll come in and say, "Here's all the things we can do," and they haven't thought about how to package it in the ecosystem. They haven't thought about resiliency for their own company. Are they going to be bought? Are they going to be out of business in a year and a half? What happens if something goes wrong? Those things have to be evaluated. You have to think about implementation costs and onward management of those costs. So what's the operational cost once it's implemented? How does it affect other systems? It's really easy to say, hey, security folks, this is going to solve an immediate need. But you have to think cross-functionally across all the IT systems, all the product and engineering systems, all the sometimes marketing systems. How does this one technology affect all of those business decisions up and downstream? If you're not taking those things into account, then as a CISO, you have to kind of step back and consider all those other things that I talked about before. So we take those very seriously. We have criteria. Some of it's weighted behind the scenes, and that's just simply so it can stay as sort of agnostic as possible through the process. And then we partner with procurement teams and such for the financial side. Hopefully that was a decent answer too.
Yeah, it actually gave me.
How much do you see? Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, it gave me another question. You talked about the challenges with recruiting, and why is that? It seems like an incredible career path to me. You get to make a difference. Your work is incredibly meaningful, but it's still just a challenge for the industry to train and fill cybersecurity positions. And I've heard it now for 10 years, maybe longer. What's your take on this? What's your read on why this continues to be a challenge?
I think it's a 3-part answer. Some of it won't be very popular. So the first part is, listen, when you're recruiting for talent, what typically happens is managers recruit an image of themselves. They want the experience. They want the way they speak and receive information and distill information, and that's hard. So if you're a 12 to 15 year seasoned professional inside of security, and you just get promoted and you want to backfill with your year of yourself, that's why you got promoted. Like, you have to start a little bit junior. And then the other part is, if you go junior, they're probably not going to have all the tools you have inside of your toolbox. So you have to find something that's really, really important that your company needs, and be willing to teach and grow and be patient as people come up the same way that you and I did over the years. And that's tough. The second part is, people assume that because we're hiring in cybersecurity, that it's only these technical engineers and only people that can code and only this deep experience. And I'm going to give you kind of a false statistic, but one that I've used for a while. I think the technical side of security is about 20%, which means 80% of what we do is non-technical business type thinking people. Now we have audit people, we have governance people, and you have project management people, and you have all these other people that are very, very important and critical to the success of a security department. And we don't really think about those kinds of thinkers. We're only focused on things like architects, engineers, vulnerability management people, security operations people, right? And that's what folks think about. So what I challenge everybody to do is just take a step back, find something, find the next generation, go to universities, do talks, give back to the community, build a cadre of the next level of folks, so that you can thoughtfully clap people out when they get promoted or move on to other companies. That's okay. You have succession in place. And so the companies that, you may not have a very large bench of cybersecurity professionals, maybe 8, 10, 12, 15 people on your team, and you say, hey, Billy, there is no succession here. We're 1-over-1. It's really important to take a breath and cross-train some folks. So maybe an architecture and an engineer are cross-training just in case. Maybe you have a cybersecurity auditor and a risk professional cross-training just in case. And I think that helps take away some of that anxiety. But the large dwindling effect is more and more companies are building technology-related things. They don't have enough bodies to hire, and you have boomers and other people retiring. And the reality is you just have less people to fill the need. So we have to get more innovative in our approach in order to be around and sustain over what's inevitably going to happen.
You pick certain people on your team to mentor. If you have 15, 20 people on your team, you probably don't have time to do hands-on mentoring with them on a regular basis, all of them, but you have the ones who are the superstars, the ones who have the most promise, the ones you can see fill in your role from a succession plan, to your point, in 2 or 3 years. How do you decide who that is? And then you probably mentor some folks outside the organization as well. Tim and I had a interesting conversation on a recent podcast in regards to this issue with Rebecca Wynn. You probably get inquiries because of your background, as the previous director of the cybersecurity for Homeland Security. You get folks who approach you and say, hey, Billy, I'd love you to mentor me. Can you coach me on, this proposal that I'm putting forward to our board of directors? How do you get a lot of those? How do you decide which ones to accept and which ones you decline?
Well, I never say no. I think it's that's why we're so busy, right? I think anyone that's gracious enough to ask me for help, I'm going to find a way to help. I think there is some qualifiers there. So I can't do your work for you, and I can't fulfill the terms of your project or request, which does happen sometimes. But I can guide and say, here's some general things that I see. Here's some other folks that you might want to talk to, so you can grow your grasp of intention and knowledge and understanding around maybe why decisions are made, or how we communicate in different how do we communicate through different levels in different parts of the organization at different times. Going back to internal in the org, I do actually spend some time mentoring with every single person in my org, but it's not every week, right? So I do these things like we call them the breakfast meetings or their dinner, depending on where you are in the country, and we'll do a random 6 or 7 folks. And we get together for 45 minutes. For me, it's every week, but it's a different group of people on my staff every week. And the idea is to talk through literally anything they want to talk through. Sometimes it has to do with business. Sometimes it has to do with career. Sometimes it's restating, questions or observations they've had throughout the day-to-day. But we want to clarify the message, and we want to make sure that we give them the amount of time that they feel like they need to fulfill their own career aspirations. Otherwise, engagement tends to drop. Now, with the first part of your question, with the high potentials, we have an impartial system of my directs, which is the leadership team of security. We get together, and we're always talking about folks that want to grow or improve or take on new challenges. So we do that, and we incorporate that through lots of methods like stretch assignments and goals. And sometimes we challenge them to do some other things like mentor their own team or grow their team, provide some training, whether it's technical training, leadership training, or otherwise, for their folks that they feel like are deserving. For us, we evaluate them on an annual basis. We follow the company kind of structure there, but we never really lose sight in my team of the opportunity to connect, mentor, and help people improve, because I feel like it's our job to help people see the path ahead no matter what. And no matter what, sometimes it's a dangerous statement, because we have people who will say, hey, listen, I've been with your company for a long time, love the company, love the people, but I want to try something new. And sometimes the feeling is it can get very disheartening because you feel like people are leaving you. And I think that's not true. We should really congratulate folks. If their journey stops with us today, we should congratulate them and continue to mentor and grow them no matter where they go. We are a small industry. The likelihood of us working together again is really high. So just because they try something different, it's not a personal attack on us as leaders.
Yeah, I completely agree with that approach. That's one I've employed in the past. I tell folks, you've been doing this job too long. You need to go do something different. even not on my team. You need to work for someone else who will give you a different perspective.
Yeah, try things out. I think that the idea of trying different jobs out only creates a more robust you when you're in the leadership role someday. Yeah. And some people are going to listen to this podcast and they're going to say, I don't want a leadership role. You know what? For the folks that are out there like that, we need you too. So either way, there's folks that are going to want to have people management positions, people who don't, they want to remain individual contributor. Either way, there's growth potential. We just need to know. And I tell people all the time, if you're expecting me to guess what your career aspirations are, then I'm going to be wrong every time. It's better if you just tell me, and then I'll work with you to map out some progression, and we can figure out what works and what doesn't for you to find that successful journey.
Speaking of journeys, how in the world did you go from staff sergeant in the Marines to director of, what I forgot the exact title you held over at the U.S. Homeland Security Department, but to that role? That's a big transition.
Yeah, by accident. I think your career kind of takes off, and I think it's really about what you do when the door opens, right? And I was really fortunate, especially early in my career, when a door opened, what would happen. And I was a person who would walk through the door and kind of figure it out and learn from those around me. So from the military, when I first got out of the military, it was tough to get your big four type jobs because we spoke heavy in acronyms. We came from battle driven areas. The regular part of society in the United States didn't really cultivate towards who we were when we came back. So I stayed with the federal government. And the idea behind the federal government is they speak in acronyms and they help you transition and give you a little bit more time. I was a lot younger and needed that time to really transition, really develop as a regular worker in society, but also as a leader inside of it. Then it was technology, which evolved into security. So when the U.S. Department of Homeland Security formed, that was my opportunity to go up to northern DC, Washington area, and really help take shape to what has become now. Of course, the things, the CISO and all the things that are here now didn't exist back then. But it was really an opportunity for me to get back to my government and say, what can I do to help make this a better place? And what it really was for me was a great learning opportunity and a whole lot of hands-on experience from people who were way more technically evolved and way more business savvy, but also took the time to mentor me and help me grow. Now, some of that advice I didn't always take in the kindest way. And what I've learned as I've gotten older, as I've continued to progress in age, is again, that stuff is a gift. And sometimes when it stings the most is when you really need to listen to it. I think that if I gave myself advice as a younger person, it would be to digest that sort of very candid feedback that I received as a younger person, because it's helped me all the way through my career even now.
So you've come up against, just with the military background, and then of course being a CISO, a lot of threats, a lot of sleepless nights all across that whole board. Recently, Sam Altman, the co-founder of OpenAI, was testified in front of Congress. I don't know if you caught that or not. It was pretty interesting. But one of the things they asked him and the other two folks who were testifying was, what is your biggest nightmare? Which is another way to say what keeps you up at night, but I think it's a little stronger. So, I'll ask you, what is your biggest nightmare in your role and that you see could happen in your profession? That's it. Full stop. What's your biggest nightmare?
Not knowing. Simple. I think once you know and understand things, there's a process, right? And if you don't have a process, you'll create a process. And I think not knowing is probably the thing that keeps me up the most at night. Because if you don't know, then you can't plan. You can't drive something to completion. You can't get it across the goal line. And sometimes that's a little frustrating.
So a lot of what you, if I paraphrase it down to action, a lot of what you do in your role is the pursuit of knowing what's going on.
Well, I think that's the first part. Yeah, I think a big chunk is discovery. So if you can get to discovery and consistent discovery, right? Because I think with anything, and for the listeners out there, if you just get to discovery and say, well, Billy said that's good, and we can sleep now. The idea is you have to dial that in, and you have to tune it. You have to make sure it's very consistent with the message that you're getting back, so that you can make data-driven decisions instead of making qualitative decisions. Because sometimes in our brains, we will look at a set of numbers, and because of our experience, it just pushes us in one direction. And I think it's really important to take a step back and logically look at the information, bounce that across some counterparts, and validate that what you're seeing is reality. And then you're making an informed decision with a consensus of leaders instead of an individual one that could actually drive more risk.
So I led my.
Sorry, Tim, you're about to ask the same question as me, I suspect.
Yeah. To close, I kind of led myself into a question du jour or topic du jour, which is AI. How do you see that playing into some of your decision making? How have your colleagues that you've been talking to been thinking about it? And even what's Teradata's position on it? And are there any proactive measures that you're seeing happen that you want to mention in this podcast around cybersecurity and AI?
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it is. That's why I like to throw it out there.
So the idea around Teradata is formulating a position now. So we are working together tightly with a group of senior leaders and others to figure out all the details behind where we want our position to be. On the other side of the industry, AI is something we have two schools of thought, right? You have one school that says, hey, put it back in the box, we're not ready for it. And you have another part of society that says, let's go, foot on the gas, we have no brakes, and let's just keep going. I think there's a lot to consider when you talk about AI. And the first being, what are the company's sort of productive outputs from using AI? And I think there's a lot of those to be had, right? Companies can think about new performance, new innovation, something that scales better, faster, whatever. But there's also equally some ethical considerations. There's bias considerations. There's privacy type considerations. So depending on where the data is coming from, it's no different. If you can't rely on it when you've collected it, you probably can't rely on it as an output. So it's really important that the collection comes from a pure place that's unbiased and has the benefit of what you need. We also have to think about who's using AI to get smarter, faster, more agile, like the attackers. If you're an adversarial attacker, AI is your best friend because you can go find things you didn't know you had. You can create kits that you didn't know how to do before, and you can push them on unsuspecting companies or code bases that probably wouldn't have been an intended consequence before. The malicious use, so taking these high-powered tools and algorithms could potentially be exploited for malicious purposes. For example, attackers could use AI to automate and scale their attacks. Things like sophisticated phishing or social engineering. I think it's been around forever. They just keep getting more realistic. But having stringent protocols and to prevent the unauthorized access to systems or AI systems and ensuring high levels of integrity to your infrastructure, whether it be cloud or on-prem or whatever, that's really important. And then I think, again, going to the education of insider threats, because if you can configure AI to convince a human or talk, right? Some of these AI tools have voices that can talk to you like we're having a conversation here. If you really got to educate people to challenge something that's a little different or they're not used to further enhance things like fraud detection and whatnot for a company. And there's probably infinite use cases. I've been on no less than 3 or 4 groups that are developing all these sort of answers and thinking about all the different use cases and problems to solve for I think for the betterment of the community. It's not just companies. So that's been really exciting for me.
Yeah, and I think it will also just, good or bad, it will make the need for cybersecurity professionals that much greater with specialized costs. And again, I know we were talking about some shortage, but this is a domain of expertise that's only going to become more and more in demand as these AI engines make threats more sophisticated.
Yeah, totally agree. I think people should also consider the type of AI, right? So especially right now, people are thinking about AI and they might think one company over the next, or whatever. But still, AI is a set of algorithms that people use for an intended output.
Yeah.
There's different ways of learning. There's different ways of compiling data. There's different models of AI to use. So it's really going to be important for security leaders to understand that as much as they've understood things like blockchain in the past or others. You have to educate yourself so you understand what the benefits and risks are.
Yep.
Do you foresee? I was about to ask. I actually thought this was the question Tim was going to ask. As you look at the threats and the ability to govern those, and actually you go back to your days at the Department of Homeland Security, I assume you began to see during that time, which is 15, 20 years ago, the early indications of the cybersecurity standards that exist today, right? Go back to sort of that timeline and their development to drive that data-driven approach that you just spoke about from a security standpoint. Do you see compliance as the means for gaining that visibility and driving adherence to securities that you put in place that help lower your risk factors? Can you speak a bit about what you've seen take place over the last 15 years along those lines?
Yeah, well, I think the journey is more exciting. I don't remember the specific use cases all the way back to the government days. The idea here, though, of saying you have nothing in the space, and then you formulate some opinions and ideas to create policies, frameworks, etc. That's important. I think the challenge you have in our space is you have too much, right, and not enough consistency. So the different frameworks, and depending on which one you're looking at, you can start from least restrictive, go all the way to most restrictive. And companies really have to comply with each subset and can increasingly improve the barometer, if you will, in order to get to that risk management factor that's hits the tolerance vector of every company, right? Or the tolerance threshold. But the idea here is which one is the one, and then that changes based on regions. It changes based on the global economy. That changes based on where the data is coming from and going to and sitting at rest, etc. And I just think it continues to be more complicated. So do I think compliance is the driver? I think compliance is a driver for some. It gets you to basic. I don't think compliance is the driver to have great security, because there's so many things you have to do outside of basic compliance to be reasonably assured that the data is going to be collected for the intended purpose, used for the intended purpose, safe, resilient, etc. That those thresholds don't specifically call out.
And the protections that are in place, do you foresee we'll be adding some to the conversation we just had about AI? You see AI making its way into some of the cybersecurity standards that exist, and how long do you foresee before that takes place?
I think it's going to take a while. I think it takes a while because the standards are governed by large bodies of people with disparate personalities and different opinions on everything. So, and that's not a bad thing either, right? So people are going to put some things on the table. People are going to debate about them. Some things will fall off, and I think the root will stay. Again, the root in the beginning, the debates that I hear the most are really around how do you protect intellectual property from being inserted in one of these models, or how do you protect the data privacy and confidentiality of whatever volumes or search history or whatever you're doing inside the models. And if you attach that to any of your company models or whatever you're doing, how does that affect the competitive nature of your company versus others? I see that a lot. It's really a fancy way of saying fairness in the involvement of AI. And I don't know that there's any of that documented today. However, there's tons of companies building maybe the backbone of their company off these AI models and connecting into other things to help people really realize the value of their data a little bit quicker.
Yeah, it's almost like that's absolutely happening, and it's almost like Y Combinator became overnight not just a startup incubator, but an AI startup incubator. And so all of these companies have exploded that are going to help other companies do more with their data, but all their data is going someplace else, so to speak. And I think the urgency around data privacy and data protection and the security of your information in the hands of these third parties will just it has to happen fast, or it's going to get out of control. The regulation behind it.
Yeah, Tim, on that, just a question that I've been mulling around and I've asked a few counterparts in the business is really around intellectual property rights. The question surrounding who owns AI generated content. That's pretty complex, right? So if you put your question or you put your data or you put your whatever and say, hey, do something with all of this because you put it in, where's ownership? Where does that go with your company? Does it stay? Did you now give it out to your model? Like, I think that's a careful thing that folks are going to have to navigate. I'm not an attorney. We're going to need some attorneys to weigh in and kind of guide the way that we think here. But I think that base question is just one of many that'll help security leaders kind of figure out, okay, depending on the output there, here's some controls or some security considerations that we need to have before saying, yep, let's just open our companies up to these models.
Yeah. I mean, Microsoft is doing a lot of work there in terms of ring fencing data, and I mean, obviously they have a big vested interest in the success of OpenAI, but I think the corporate entity will drive their own regulation for the time being. I just hope it happens sooner rather than later out of some governmental organizations.
Yeah, for sure. I think Microsoft's awesome. Me for one, I'm pretty grateful to be working for a connected multi-cloud data platform company, and we by the very nature of what we do, we help companies transform, many of which are the world's largest and most innovative companies, turn their data into their greatest asset. So a lot of the things that I'm talking about, this is a one-to-one opportunity for Teradata, or companies like Teradata.
Yeah, I can see that.
The ideal scenario would be they would keep their data within your platform for analysis, and they're not taking it out into the public cloud where some of those intellectual property issues begin. The lines blur, to your point. I assume that would be your argument, and that's one way you can ensure that your employees aren't dumping code that's intellectual property into a public cloud that then could be accessible by millions of people, literally.
Yeah, I think we'd love for folks to use our platform and allow our platform to do the heavy lifting, so they can have the results at their fingertips and make better informed decisions for their companies.
Makes a lot of sense. What's your concept of structured, unstructured data? How do you control access to it? Does it differ as a CISO? And that's sort of the heart and blood of your business as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to go back for, you have these sort of structured, unstructured data qualifications, and I think they're different and they present unique challenges when it comes to data protection. For example, structured data is typically stored in a highly organized manner. It's often in things like relational databases where it can be easily sorted and searched and whatnot. Some of the examples there could be customer records or transactional data or anything else that can easily be categorized in rows and columns. So if you're a person that looks at things like that, that's amazing. Unstructured data, on the other hand, includes things like emails and documents, multimedia, social media posts, right? Things that doesn't easily fit into what I just described before. So if you think about structured, access control is usually easier to implement because you can implement at the database level, prevent unauthorized access. Implementing that same access control for unstructured data can be much more challenging because this data often resides in multiple places, various formats, etc. Things like data classification. Classification in an unstructured system, it has to be classified and determine sensitivity, level of protection required. That can be complex and time consuming, often requiring the use of AI or machine learning tools to kind of help sift through it. In a structured data, things like data masking techniques become prevalent. Encryption, auditing and monitoring, like these are all typical things that I could probably talk forever. In an unstructured system, some of those things like encryption are much more complex because it's distributed across various systems and formats. So you go from one to many, and when you evolve into many, it becomes a little bit more complex, but not impossible.
Interesting. Well, Billy, we really enjoyed this conversation. This has been enlightening, and hopefully we get a chance to talk to you again in a few months about some of the new permutations that we talked about that are taking place today. AI will have Verizon, as we spoke about before the call started, their data breach investigations report will be out in the marketplace. Be interested to get your insights on those. So for audience members who would like more information on Teradata, I assume they simply should go to your website. Any other directions that you'd like to provide them?
Yeah, check out our website, teradata.com. If you need more, reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. You can find all my details there, and I'd be happy to point you to the right direction.
That's great. Billy, thanks for your time today. Thanks to our audience. As always, if you're interested in other Kitecast episodes, go to kiteworks.com/Kitecast. Look forward to having you on our next podcast.